In this video, we are going to read the full story of Act 1 of The Way of the World, and we'll try to analyze some important points from each scene of this act. The actor who plays Fennel delivers the prologue in which Congreve complains about the high expectations of the audience and the general ability of the poet to please everyone. Congreve also promises that his play will be full of jokes but won't try to reform the audience. So, by starting his play by complaining, Congreve lessens the pressure on himself as playwright. But this is also something of a strategy, as he is perfectly confident of his abilities and does not exactly keep to his word. His play does try to reform the audience but uses humor to point out the vices of society. In having the actor who plays Fennel rather than Fennel the character, or any other character for that matter, deliver the prologue, Congreve plays with the way that actors are in fact only pretending to be the characters they portray, and therefore emphasizes in this play about plotting, scheming and role-playing that Congreve himself and the play he has created are the ultimate scheme, the plot behind the plot. Act 1, Scene 1. It is around midday in a London chocolate house, a fashionable meeting place for 18th century gentlemen. Two men, Mirabell and Fennel, are playing cards. Fennel ends the game, though when he senses that Mirabell's mind is preoccupied with something that's making him contemplative and grave. So, in the beginning, through the naked and untrained eye, the two gentlemen might seem like friends. This is no friendly game of cards. The men are rivals, and the act of playing cards mirrors the competition of skill and bluffing that both men will soon engage in to win a huge fortune. So, Scene 1 continues. Fennel encourages Mirabell to confide in him about his uncommonly demeanor. Mirabell reveals that he is upset because the night before, while he was visiting his love, the popular and the beautiful Millamant, both Millamant and her 50-year-old aunt, Lady Wisford, asked him to leave in front of their other guests, members of a semi-secret and mostly female society or cabal, led by Lady Wisford, that gathers weekly to gossip about various town people. Fennel tries to soothe Mirabell, reminding him that Millamant has to go along with the wishes of her aunt, whom she lives with, because Wisford, who is also Fennel's mother-in-law, controls Millamant's hefty fortune until Millamant gets married. So, Fennel does not ask about Mirabell's feelings because he actually cares about him. He is more likely looking for information that might be useful to plot against Mirabell in the future. Meanwhile, this conversation sets out the stakes of the play. Mirabell's attempt to win Millamant's love and to marry her, and also establishes the social forces of family and money that complicate matters of love in Restoration England, when the play was written and set. At the same time, Fennel's knowledge of Wisford and Millamant's financial affairs hint at his own interest in that money. So, Act 1, Scene 1 continues. Fennel also reminds Mirabel that he has only himself to blame for Wishfort's low opinion of him. Up until recently, Mirabel had been hiding his advances toward Millamant by also flattering Wishfort. Wishfort mistook Mirabel's flirtation as evidence that he loved her. Once Wishfort realized that Mirabel was not interested in her, her attitude towards him completely changed. Now she seeks revenge by thwarting his efforts to court her niece. So, here clearly Mirabel is not completely innocent in this situation. He led Wishfort on, a woman who does not forgive easily, in order to get closer to her niece. A plan that makes Mirabel seem quite ruthless. However, Wishfort also comes off as vain and silly for thinking that the young and attractive Mirabel would be interested in her. So, Act 1, Scene 1 continues. Mirabel refuses to blame himself for what happened. He notes that Wishfort only discovered the truth because it was revealed to her by Mrs. Marwood, a close family friend to both Wishfort and her daughter. Mrs. Fennel's wife, Mirabel also hints that Marwood is more than just a friend to Fennel. So, here the world of love in Restoration period at times becomes quite complicated. Fennel spoke of love and family and money. Now Mirabel's hints about Fennel's infidelity suggest that beneath the proper world of Restoration society there is a world of affairs and secrets. Meanwhile, Mirabel and Fennel's conversation is full of oblique innuendo as the two of them jockey to gain information on and power over the other. So, Act 1, Scene 1 continues. Fennel ignores Mirabel's insinuation that he is having an affair with Marwood. Instead, Fennel asks Mirabel for details about why Marwood might have motives for ruining Mirabel's hopes of winning Millamant's hand. So, here Fennel's question might seem to arise from his innocent curiosity, but in fact, he is worried that Marwood sabotaged Mirabel's chances with Millamant because she loves Mirabel too. In other words, Fennel worries that his mistress is cheating on him. So, again, Act 1, Scene 1 continues. Mirabel admits that he is confused by Marwood's sudden animosity towards him, as he never paid much attention to her. This answer, however, does not satisfy the jealous Fennel, who can't tell whether something more took place between Mirabel and Marwood. The conversation by this point is less friendly, and Fennel ends the conversation by suggesting they go and visit with their mutual friends Petulant and Wheatwood, who are lounging in an adjoining room. Mirabel declines and Fennel exists. So, here Mirabel's confusion indicates that he clearly never held feelings for Marwood. However, Fennel's jealousy prevents Fennel from realizing this. Over the course of the conversation, the two men's mutual dislike becomes more apparent, though it is still hidden behind at least a modicum of social pleasantry. The scene 2 of Act 1 is a smaller one. In this scene, a messenger arrives at the chocolate house with important news for Mirabel. The secret wedding which he organized took place at the Duke's palace a few hours ago. Mirabel is pleased. The footman also gives Mirabel the marriage certificate and tells him that the clothes Mirabel ordered for Waitwell, Mirabel's manservant, are ready. Before the footman departs, Mirabel gives him further instruction for the newlyweds to meet him at Rosamond's Pond at 1 o'clock. So here, the messenger and secret wedding indicate that Mirabel was not at the chocolate house just to hang out. He has been waiting for this message all morning, which suggests he is up to something, though what he is up to isn't yet clear. It is clear that Mirabel is a clever and organized schemer. Moreover, Waitwell seems like he will play an important role in the plan. That Mirabel would order his servant a new and expensive suite certainly has more to do with intrigue than generosity. In scene 3, shortly after the messenger leaves, Fennel rejoins Mirabel and notes his improved mood. Mirabel responds only that he is engaged in a matter of some mirth, that he is not yet prepared to divulge. Mirabel also mentions that he is glad that tonight isn't a cabal night. He asks Fennel whether he allows Mrs. Fennel to attend these cabal gatherings of whispers. Fennel responds that he is not jealous of the company his wife meets at these parties because most of the women are relatives like Millamant, his wife's cousin, and the men are pathetic. Mirabel disagrees with Fennel, suggesting that scandal arises precisely when women hang around with fools. Fennel responds by asking Mirabel whether that means he is jealous that Millamant often entertains their foolish friend Witwoud. So here, the two men's verbal jousting continues, in which they seek to improve their wit while also ferreting out dirt on each other. Fennel doesn't realize that Mirabel's good news actually foretell Fennel's defeat and Mirabel's victory. Mirabel realizes it, however, and secretly finds it very funny to be congratulated by his opponent. Here we should note how women and men have separate social circles where they gossip and talk about at each other. The women at Whisper's Cabal, the men at the chocolate house. Mirabel understands human nature than Fennel. He knows that smart women like Millamant only surround themselves with fools for attention. But he also recognizes the way such behavior can harm a reputation. So, scene 3 continues. Rather than arguing further with Fennel, Mirabel describes his love for Millamant. He explains that he loves the entirety of Millamant, both her charms and her flaws. This admission seems to surprise Fennel, who encourages him to marry her. However, Fennel warns Mirabel that when he becomes a married man, he should focus more on Millamant's faults than on her charms if he wants to maintain his independence. So, here Mirabel's love for Millamant is mature and deep. We can see that. He sees her for what she is and accepts her shortcomings. The depth of Mirabel's love for Millamant shows that he is more than just a witty, charismatic trickster. Though the play is driven by his schemes, those schemes are driven by love. Fennel lacks such love, and in fact sees love not as a positive but as something that threatens to capture a man. The scene 4 again is a small one. Here, while Mirabell and Fennel are in conversation, a messenger approaches Betty, the chocolate house waitress, who has been waiting on the two men. He tells her that he is there to deliver a letter to Wheatwood from Sir Wilful Wheatwood, Wheatwood's older and unfashionable half-brother from the countryside. Betty instructs him to do so. So, in this scene, the servants and attendants are often seen but not heard. Betty has been standing in the room the whole time that Mirabell and Fennel have been in discussion. But the men consider her part of the room and don't pay attention to her presence until they need to. This decision will come back to bite Marud and Fennel when other less discreet servants are ignored. In scene 5, having witnessed the exchange between Betty and the messenger, Mirabell and Fennel begin gossiping about Sir Wilful. In particular, they criticize his plan to better himself by traveling abroad. During this conversation, Mirabell learns that Sir Wilful is related to Mrs. Fennel and Millamant. His mother is Wishfort's sister. Fennel remarks that if Mirabell were to marry Millamant, then he too would be related to Sir Wilful. If given a choice between being related to Wilful or being his friend, Mirabell says that he would rather be related. So, here the men look down on Sir Wilful's decision to travel for his education because they consider him too old to undertake the continental tour of Europe, which was typically undertaken by men who were coming of age. Mirabell's sentiment reflects the adage, "You can choose your friends but not your family." At the same time, this may be Mirabell's way of indirectly saying that he would prefer to be married to Millamant since that is what would make Wilful his relative. So, scene 5 continues. Fennel describes Sir Wilful as an altogether lovable and harmless fool with a penchant of drunkenness. Mirabell calls him a fool with a good memory, whose lack of wit makes him exceptionally good-natured. According to Mirabell, Wilful is unable to tell when he is the butt of the joke. Just then, Sir Wilful's half-brother Wheatwood enters the room. So, here, the way in which the men describe Sir Wilful emphasizes his lack of wit, thereby emphasizing their own wit and reaffirming their sense of superiority. They also remark on Sir Wilful's inability to understand wit as a problem of translation. He does not understand London's culture. In scene 6 of Act 1, Wheatwood joins the men and immediately takes over the conversation, remarking that he is not looking forward to Sir Wilful's visit and stresses the fact that they are only step-brothers. Wheatwood then says he does not want to dwell on the topic of his half-brother and instead turns the conversation to Fennel and compliments Fennel for having a happy marriage. Mirabell responds that Mrs. Fennel would draw a more accurate and vastly different picture of her marriage. So, here Wheatwood, with his domination of the conversation, followed by his humorous statement that he does not want to dwell on the topic he brought up, is immediately established as less witty than the other two men, which of course raises the question of just how non-witty Sir Wilful must be. Mirabel's hint of the underlying dysfunction between Mr. and Mrs. Fennel reveals that he is on Mrs. Fennel's side. It also gives another view on love, that marriages are not always as happy as they seem to outsiders, perhaps particularly for women. So, scene 6 continues. Witude is shocked and scolds Mirabel for his impertinence, but then forgets what he meant to say next and apologizes for his poor memory. Mirabel warns him that fools often reveal themselves as fools by complaining about their poor memories. So, whereas Sir Wilful has a good memory, Witude is clearly a fool with a bad memory. He is not savvy enough with repartee to admonish Mirabel using wit, and so must use direct language. So, scene 6 continues again. The conversation turns to Petulant now, who has recently won quite a bit of Witude's money in a game of cards. Fennel teases Witude that it's only fair that Petulant should have won Witude's money because Witude is the wittier of the two and always dominates conversation with Petulant. Mirabel tries to get Witude to badmouth Petulant by suggesting that Petulant would not admit Witude is wittier. Witude is unwilling to insult his friend. However, the more he tries to defend Petulant, the more he begins to insult Petulant's character in the process of trying excuse his flaws. So, here Petulant lacks conversational skills. We can clearly see that. But he has practical skills, unlike Witude. Witude and Petulant then make quite a complementary pair. The two serve as comic relief in the play, and in portraying such non-wits, Congreve establishes what wit is through its negative. Meanwhile, Mirabel incites Witude in order to get information out of him that will be helpful to his plot. Mirabel is good at reading people and knows what buttons to push to make them do what he wants. So, scene 6 continues. Witude refuses, though, to name the particular flaw of Petulant's that most annoys him. This leads Mirabel and Fennel to suggest numerous defects in Petulant's personality: illiteracy, small vocabulary, etc. etc. But Witude claims to actually admire these traits as they allow Witude to explain his meaning. Finally, Mirabel hits close to the answer when he suggests that Petulant tells unbelievable lies because he does not have enough wit to invent more compelling lies. Witude laughs, responding that in fact he hates that Petulant never tells the truth at all, which to him is an unpardonable fault. So, here the way of the world as a comedy is revealed, and Witude and Petulant are meant to be comic fools in this play. Here, Witude, clearly a fool, indicates that he likes his friend Petulant's faults because they make Witude look wise. Witude does not put up with Petulant's compulsive lying because Petulant does not draw a distinction between lying to outsiders and to his best friend. Again, the scene 7 is a small one. Here, in the meantime, 3 women sitting in a coach just outside the chocolate house send a coachman in to inquire whether Petulant is there. Betty responds that he is indeed is there. The coachman then asks for refreshments for his passengers, 2 dishes of chocolate and a glass of cinnamon water. So here the women in the couch are part of one of Petulant's ridiculous plots to make himself seem more popular than he is. Notably, they don't enter the chocolate house because as women they would not be welcome inside. In scene 8, Wheatwood observes the exchange between Betty and the coachman and comments to Mirabel and Fennel that Petulant actually hired the women outside to pretend to be his lovers and thereby make him look more popular. He then adds that Petulant often goes to even greater lengths in order to be noticed. So, the women were hired by Petulant to call on him at public places in order to make him seem promiscuous and desirable to eyewitnesses. Just as the contract offered by Petulant, the fool highlights Mirabel's wit. Petulant's silly schemes emphasize just how sophisticated Mirabel's schemes are in comparison. So, scene 8 continues. Wheatwood explains Petulant's trick of calling on himself to a baffled Mirabel and Fennel. Petulant used to slip out of the chocolate house, rush home, disguise his appearance, and return to ask the staff at the chocolate house about where he could find Petulant, sometimes even going so far as to leave a letter for himself. So, as his antics suggest, Petulant is a ridiculous fellow who cares a lot about what other people think about him. He will go to great lengths to make himself popular and become the object of gossip, whether good or bad, because he wants to have a reputation as a flirt and wit, like Mirabel. Of course, he is not a wit, and so he can't have that reputation. So we are in scene 9, the last scene of Act 1. Here, when Petulant arrives, he tells Betty to send the coach away. Even if the women inside snivel and cry, Mirabel and Fennel of course begin to tease him about his ill treatment of the 3 unknown women. Petulant does not seem to understand their subtle jokes and talks about the women as if they were his former lovers. Wheatwood periodically interrupts to clarify Petulant's meaning and supply him with more elegant words to use. Petulant then jokes that the 3 women are Wheatwood's cousins and aunt, Mrs. Fennel, Millamant and Wishford, respectively. Rather than being offended, Wheatwood laughs off Petulant's insult toward his family. So, Petulant does not realize that Mirabel and Fennel know his secret, which makes him feel bold enough to mistreat the women. He has mistaken ideas about what it takes to be in gentlemanly society. Petulant takes the joke too far by insulting Wheatwood's family and Fennel's wife. He does not know how to imitate a wit's personality and betrays his foolishness and crass nature instead. Meanwhile, Wheatwood acts as Petulant's translator, which he thinks makes him look intelligent. Everyone is trying to be witty, but only some people actually are. So, scene 9 continues. Mirabel, however, half-jokingly warns Petulant to stay away from Millamant. In response, Petulant suggests that he is not the biggest threat to Mirabel's courtship of Millamant. Mirabel presses Petulant for details. Petulant explains that at Whitsport's cabal night before, he learned that Mirabel's uncle is coming to stay at Whitsport's and is the favored contender for Millamant's hand. He adds that Millamant's marriage to his uncle, who already has a bad relationship with Mirabel, would lead to Mirabel's disinheritance should the marriage produce a child. So, at this point, things look bad for Mirabel, as he seems to finding out more and more information that now threatens not just his chances with Millamant, but his own health, own wealth. Whitsport seems to favor this contender precisely because it would be most harmful for Mirabel. So, scene 9 continues. Mirabel wants even more details and tells Petulant that he will regard him as wittier than Witwoud if Petulant reveals that what he knows. Petulant demands that Mirabel admit in public that he, Petulant, has common sense. Mirabel promises to do that. Fennel remarks that Mirabel seems worried about Petulant and Witwoud as competitors for Millamant's affections. So, Mirabel knows that gossip operates by principles of trade. You have to give something to get something. Petulant wants Mirabel's stamp of approval because he thinks it will be more effective than his other schemes for gaining a reputation. Mirabel thinks it's just one more harebrained scheme. Fennel, meanwhile, enjoys what he thinks is Mirabel's discomfort. So, scene 9 continues. Witwoud comforts Mirabel, though explaining that Millamant laughs at Petulant's advances, that his own interest in Millamant is not serious. Though he admires her beauty, he claims that he cannot love Millamant because she is so inconsistent in her loyalties. For instance, she expressed interest in Mirabel's uncle at the cabal. Witwoud also reveals that Whitsport knows that Mirabel and his uncle don't get along and is planning to use this fact to develop a plot against Mirabel. So, Fennel is trying to undermine Mirabel and make him feel insecure. Though Witwoud tries to reassure Mirabel by reminding him that he and Petulant are in fact bad matches for Millamant, his comment about Millamant's inconsistency raises the possibility that she actually isn't a match for anyone. Again, scene 9 continues. After Witwoud's report, Mirabel invites Fennel to leave the chocolate house with him and go for a walk in the mall. When Witwoud invites himself and Petulant along, Mirabel wonders aloud whether Witwoud should instead stay and wait for his half-brother. Witwoud responds that Wilful is going to arrive at Whitsport's house that evening, at which point Mirabel gets to the point. He does not want to walk with Witwoud or Petulant at the mall. He does not approve of the way they try to make female passerby blush with their suggestive and rude remarks. Petulant defends himself, arguing that the women who blush are either guilty of knowing too much about sex or are ill-bred. So, here Witwoud and Petulant clearly lack the social graces to understand whether they are or are not invited along. Meanwhile, Petulant's defense about his suggestive remarks to women reveal two things. One, his vulgarity. And number two, more importantly, it captures the difficulties that women face socially with men, who both want them for sex and blame them for being anything other than completely innocent about sex.